The Amity Board of Education special meeting for April 27, 2026 is called to order at 6:37. Emergency exits are located on both sides of the back of the room. Please silence your cell phones. Remind members, staff, and guests to respect the business nature of our meeting. Comments may be made only when recognized, and applause is appropriate only in recognition of an individual, a group honor, or special presentation. Thank you for your cooperation. Please stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're going to move right into number 3, approval of minutes. We have 2 meetings. First of all, may I have a motion for the Board of Education public hearing, April 6, 2026. Motion to approve, Autumn, and second, Michael. Any corrections, changes? If not, can we call the roll, please?
Ms. Bradley?
Abstain.
Ms. Cloud Ingram?
Yes.
Ms. Jacquet?
Yes.
Dr. Kruna-Karan?
Yes.
Ms. Lombardi?
Abstain.
Ms. Rebuse?
Yes.
Mr. Reed?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Dr. Nope. Ms. Schlenk? Nope, sorry. Ms. Who did I? Oh, I was thinking from policy. I'm sorry. Dr. Oladile?
Yes.
Sorry. Ms. Schuster?
Yes.
And Mr. Young?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Motion
you.
carries.
Chairman Davies, motion to amend the agenda for this evening to include discussion on 5145.53. Is there a second?
Second.
This is a special meeting?
This is a special meeting. As far as I know, the agenda cannot be amended.
That's correct. May by majority vote of the board, it can.
Not at a special meeting, only a regular meeting. Under FOIA.
Okay.
Special meetings limited to the agenda.
That's specifically stated in our bylaws, I believe.
By advice of
That's
counsel, who wasn't consulted, is present, and certainly deferential to the position you hold. Follow your advice.
According to the statute, when I get a minute.
The chair rules that the motion is out of order and not in keeping with our rules for special meetings. Okay, we move on to B, Board of Education regular meeting, minutes, April 6, 2026. Motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting.
We have a question.
Oh,
no, I'm motion. Oh, sorry.
Michael?
Either way.
Second.
Yes.
Through there. Any corrections, changes? Not, please call the roll.
I just wanted to confirm, was Autumn the first and Michael McDonough was the second?
That works.
Thanks. Okay, Ms. Bradley?
Abstain.
Ms. Cloud Ingram?
Yes.
Ms. Jacquet?
Yes.
Dr. Kruna-Karan?
Yes.
Ms. Lombardi?
Abstain.
Ms. Rebuse?
Yes.
Mr. Reed?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Dr. Oladile?
Yes.
Ms. Schuster? I'm sorry, Ms. Schuster?
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay, no problem. Mr. Young?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, motion carries. Go to our students' report. Both of you are here today, so I guess you both get to give us some information, hopefully. Janet?
So hello, good evening everybody. So I'm pleased to share about several highlights from student life at Amity. The first was last week we had our portion of the graduate presentations for our juniors. So more than 300 juniors presented on their growth in the 5 characteristics, which you may remember were collaboration, communication, empathy, planning, and problem solving. And so faculty and staff from all 3 schools in the district formed panels and were audiences for our students and gave them feedback after their presentations. So we're really grateful to our faculty and staff support. In addition, we had a lot of success recently in the science department. So we had the University of Bridgeport RISE Science Fair, where we had 2 students win recognition. junior Zian Zhang won an honorable mention, and senior Casey Tam won 3rd place overall. And we also had another student who's in the science research program win a semifinalist for the Samsung Solve for Tomorrow competition, and her work on wireless charging systems for pacemakers has secured $10,000 in educational technology for our school district. In addition, in our World Language department, we were able to induct 76 new members into the World Languages Honor Societies. So these are students who demonstrated remarkable academic achievement throughout their time at Amity, taking very high-level world language courses. And then on the practical life skills area, students have also been learning financial literacy through a reality fair hosted by the financial literacy teachers. So in this event, 370 students engaged in realistic budgeting and financial planning scenarios alongside community volunteers. In addition, in honor of Earth Day, students and faculty members from the Farm to Table Club collected over 70 pounds of garbage during an Earth Day campus cleanup on our school. And then finally, we want to point out the achievements of the Amity Creative Theater. I don't know if any of you were able to catch their most recent production, which was My Fair Lady. And that production actually earned 8 Stephen Sondheim Award nominations. So this is a theater award program that looks at musical productions across the state of Connecticut. And this is actually our 17th consecutive nomination for Best Musical, which is an outstanding achievement. We also won individual recognitions for lighting, sound, acting, and direction. So this just shows, along with our student orchestra and ensemble, and this just shows the professional grade talent that we truly have within our arts department here at Amity. Looking ahead, we will continue to have a busy week with the orchestra and the Tri-M Music Honor Society both holding concerts in this upcoming week, so if you're able to catch it, highly recommend. And I will turn it over to Shreya to get the middle school report.
Good evening. April has been an exceptionally productive period for both our Bethany and Orange middle schools. Looking at just the sheer volume of their calendar, it's clear that students and staff have maintained a high level of momentum. So April featured several significant 7th grade field trips. AMSO visited the Bridgeport Islanders hockey game on April 1st, followed by AMSB on April 2nd. And these trips provided a valuable opportunity for community building outside of the classroom. On April 7th and April 9th, AMSB 7th grade teams visited the Discovery Museum and Planetarium. When combined with the UConn STEM workshops for young women held earlier this month, it's clear that the schools are focusing on moving science more out of the textbook and providing students with hands-on, real-world applications of the curriculum. In terms of community service and spirit, on April 8th, the combined AMSB and AMSO Unified Sports Team participated in the Amity Mobile Penguin Plunge to support Special Olympics Connecticut. Just seeing middle school students collaborate with high school mentors to raise funds for over 14,000 athletes is a powerful example of the character building that's happening in our district. Additionally, on April 10th, AMSO hosted the Holly Rock Game Show, which was a high-energy student assembly that allowed students to practice teamwork through interactive academic and physical challenges. So there's also been a transition and reflection period for 8th graders. So following the spring break, which ran from April 13th to April 17th, our 8th graders began their final rites of passage. So on April 23rd, both buildings held their Portrait of the Graduate Reflection Day, where students spent an extended advisory period using Schoology to document their growth in the district's POG components. And while the 8th graders have been taking their panoramic photos this month, they also engaged in significant off-campus learning. So this month, the 8th grade class from both schools got to travel to Boston for duck boat tours and a visit to Fenway Park. And on that same day, while the students were in Boston, the AMSO and AMSB faculty were at the high school watching the junior POG reflections, juniors in high school. And this vertical alignment ensured that our middle school teachers could see exactly where their students are headed, which allowed them to better prepare the 8th graders for their transition to high school. As we look forward to the Global Studies Fair on May 1st for AMSB and May 7th for AMSO, and the various spring concerts, the academic and social momentum in both buildings is really clear. So thank you so much for your continued support for these programs, and we're available for any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Any board members have any questions or comments? Or?
I have a question. When does momentum start to wane a little? I know, like, as we get closer to the end of the school year, I'm just impressed that, like, there's still so much going on and kids are still excited.
It doesn't.
I don't know. Oh, it does? Really?
It just keeps on going right up to exams. So our seniors have, 7 days left with their teachers before they hit UELPs.
Really?
Uh-huh.
You said 7?
Yeah, 7. Yeah. And that's actually a fun and exciting time.
Oh.
Just want to mention the awards for the show. I spoke to the director, and he informed me that competition may be a little greater this year. More than twice as many schools have been nominated. So I think he mentioned something like 42 schools are possibly in the competition there. So it's a big increase. And for those of you who are not aware, it's an Amity grad who really is very much involved in developing this awards program for the state. So it's a nice pat on the back also for the Amity School District. Okay, superintendent's report.
It is enclosed in the board's packet and option of saving the board time with your attorney. I'm just going to ask that you read it at some point.
Chairman's report. One major item that I want to bring to your attention that the school district kind of received a nice honor in having our superintendent elected as chair for the South Central Area School Administrators for this year, which I believe also puts you on the executive board of the statewide organization. So we appreciate that, and it's kind of a tribute to your contribution to education, not only here, but around the state. So.
Congratulations. Yeah, congratulations.
Also, point to bring up there, as most of you are aware of, there's been a lot of emails going around over the past few weeks, and particularly this weekend. And I think that Dr. Breyer suggested that we be careful about those. I want to remind all the board members to not send a response to everyone for everything, because that could turn into a meeting situation.
Don't reply to all.
Okay. So that's one area. And I don't mean to pick on you, Christian, but
We're going to talk about 5145.53,
no,
are we?
No, we're not. But I do want to thank you for your unintentional compliment. I sent an email out in response to yours, and you replied that I must have consulted with the attorney and so on. I didn't. It was all mine. All mine. So I appreciate it. I work very hard on that. I do appreciate the compliment, although I have to say, when you sit in the state legislature for 10 years, you've got to absorb an awful lot of that statutory language and understanding, so
Sure, rubs off
I
on
cheated
everybody.
maybe in that area. All right, so next, Board Roles and Responsibilities Workshop. Early in April, I met with our attorney, and we went over some of the concerns of the board. I sat down with him, I think it was early in April, and we discussed that. So we had a little bit of a basis for what we'd like to talk about. I did at the last meeting also request that if anybody had specific questions in advance, to send them to myself or the superintendent. I didn't get any.
I did send a lengthy email that was directed to you about the meeting with the attorney. And then you told me that the item could not be added to the agenda.
Oh, that was it. Right, okay. But were there specific questions that you'll be able to bring up tonight?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fine. So I'd like to turn this over to you. And,
Just for future reference, Connecticut General Statute 1-225, small e in parens, part of the Freedom of Information Act. It talks about notice of meetings. It first starts talking about regular meetings. And then it goes on to talk about special meetings, and it says, such notice shall not be given less than 24 hours prior to the time of the special meeting. And it talks about an emergency meeting, which seldom apply. And then it goes on to say, just give me a second to find the language. Such notice shall specify the time and place of the special meeting and the business to be transacted. And then importantly, no other business shall be considered at such meeting by the agency. And there's lots of FOIA cases. It's pretty clear, but lots of FOIA cases.
so this is a FOIA.
Yeah, you can't add to the special meeting, so I just wanted to.
Okay.
I knew you were going to show me a minute ago, but we were in the middle of the presentation. That's why I appreciate your, no, hey,
Okay.
say so.
Okay.
The floor, man.
That-
I hold you to it. I appreciate it, thanks.
That's exactly why we have him here tonight, and he's done a good job for us for several years. But I also want to mention, we do have other attorneys working for the school district who have expertise in other areas. And the board, in many cases, will have to appoint those individuals also if there's a special case that comes up. So that's something you might have to look to the future and maybe on the agenda of our special meeting if we do have to bring in other attorneys.
Okay, so I'm going to hand out some materials. Excuse me. And for those of you who have been through this before, I apologize. I'm going to try to truncate it. For anybody who did not participate in the last presentation, I did, and there's anything specific that I don't cover, feel free to, first of all, read the materials, but if you have any questions, reach out to me, and I'll be happy to answer any of the questions.
Just a quick question. Aren't we all required to go through the roles and responsibility compliance training before we join the board? So hasn't everybody already experienced that?
I don't know the answer. I know CABE does some training, and so I don't know who has and has not gone through the training.
I can probably answer that. I said yes to your question, and like all things we deal with, a lot of people sit there and go through the motions, and others take it a little bit more seriously. If you read this whole thing, that's great, but a lot of times people just look at it and don't really look at it, if you know what I mean. So it's the expectation that anyone serving on this board would have looked at that information. And while we don't excuse people not knowing the information, we understand that it's impossible to absorb all this, particularly in one session. So, maybe the future is maybe we need to have little workshops on the whole situation from year to year. And maybe something to consider.
And actually, the mandated retraining for new board members only became a statute maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So it is entirely possible. We always did it as a matter of practice because it's good practice, but it is entirely possible that there are boards of education where board members were not trained because they didn't have to be until recently.
Well, and like you and I went to a whole day, but not everybody did.
No, but I
Some
mean,
people just had like an hour.
we went to the whole day, and then Christian and I also went to a meeting where we went through this exact packet, so I was just.
So you're familiar with it, right?
Right.
Probably a
Great.
year ago?
Right.
Or was it more?
Not even, like, in November or
In
December.
November or December, yeah.
Yeah, right after the last election, probably.
Oh, okay. Well,
All right, so in any event, for that reason, I'm not going to go through everything here. I want to hit the big issues to see if I can help guide you with some of the questions that have come up. So let me start by saying, like any state or municipal or any agency in the state of Connecticut, federal government for that matter, you folks only have such power and authority as is delegated to you by statute through the state of Connecticut. So that's the first point. What I do typically in this presentation, and by the way, I've been giving this presentation for a number of years, So the information I'm giving you is not something I developed for this current situation. It's the information that I've been utilizing. I've been told it's very close to, if not parallel to what CABE advises people. I've also, over the last almost 40 years, attended National School Board, Council of School Attorney meetings with the same sort of information, even though they have different statutes, they're very similar. And so this is, in my opinion, fairly consistent throughout the state, if not the nation. But turning specifically to Connecticut, it all starts with the state constitution, believe it or not, Article 8, Section 1, and that provision guarantees a free public education to the children of this state. And then, as you'll see in a moment, what's happened is the state, as the state likes to do sometimes, pardon me, it's delegated its responsibility down to you folks and to other regional boards of education and local boards of education. So state constitution says we're going to give every kid in the state a free education, and then they delegate that to you to take care of for the most part. There are several statutes which I think are really the fountainhead of your authority and what you do, and not just you, but the school district and the superintendent. And I'm just going to touch upon those very briefly, and then I want to talk about what does it say and what doesn't it say. Okay? So the first and most important is Connecticut General Statutes 10-220, and this is really the primary vehicle by which the General Assembly has delegated to you responsibility for educating the kids in the school district. And I could go through the whole thing, but I'm just going to highlight some of the key provisions here. It says each local or regional board of education shall maintain good public elementary and secondary schools, comma, implement the educational interests of the state, comma, and then it goes on from there. And then it says you shall specifically provide an appropriate learning environment for students, which includes, doesn't say including but not limited to, but the lawyers can talk about that, adequate instructional books, supplies, material, equipment, staffing, facilities, and technology. It goes on to say an equitable allocation of resources among its schools, proper maintenance of the facilities, a safe school setting. Goes on to talk about child abuse reporting, shall have charge of the schools in its respective district, shall designate the schools which shall be attended by the various children within the school district, shall make such provisions as will enable each child of school age residing in the district to attend some public day school and provide for transportation, shall cause each child 5 years of age and under 18 who's not a high school graduate to attend school. In subparagraph B, it talks about prepare a statement of educational goals for the local or regional school district. Goes on to C to talk about strategic school profile and what you have to provide. It goes into air quality testing. I'm jumping ahead to subparagraph E. Each region.
What page are you on?
I'm sorry, I'm not in my materials.
It's not in the materials. I didn't know that. Okay.
No, I'm skimming 10-220, which is referred to in the materials, but I'm just trying to give you some of the specifics that are in 10-220.
Okay, that wasn't clarified, so I was looking for it.
Okay, sorry about that. Each local and regional boards of education shall establish a school district curriculum committee. The committee shall recommend, develop, review, and approve all curriculum for the school district. And what I did is I went through it and tried to identify anything that was fairly specific in terms of what the delegation and your responsibilities are there. And I'll certainly acknowledge that the very opening phrase, shall maintain good public and elementary and secondary schools and implement the educational interests of the state, is broad enough you can drive a proverbial dump truck through it, okay? So, and I haven't, there's nothing in there, to the best of my knowledge or recollection, that I think is relevant to the issues and the concerns here. I've just tried highlighting some of the specific statutory responsibilities that are delegated to you under 10-220.
Before you go on,
Yeah.
I do have a question. That opening statement
Yeah.
about the state,
Maintain good public and elementary and secondary schools and implement the educational interests of the state.
so I have always read that to mean that this board is responsible primarily to the state or fulfilling the statutes of the state. And we've had that issue here on a number of years where there's a particular statute and somebody said, well, why don't you just ignore it? But so when we are elected, we become agents of the state and,
Absolutely.
all right.
You are, there's case law saying you are an agent of the state in terms of carrying out their
So
responsibilities.
if someone in our town says, why don't you do this? And I said, well, it's against the state law. I said, but you work for us. You've been elected by us. That's.
Yeah, it's kind of a dual thing
Okay.
where you have responsibilities based upon, you know, your charter and you know, local laws that you have to comply with. It's a little different here. I was thinking of the analogy of if a town has a procurement statute, you're required by law to follow that. A little different here because you have much broader authority than a local school district would have. But absolutely, you're responsible for implementing the educational interests of the state, whatever that means.
What happens when state and federal law are in conflict?
That is a very complex question, one that probably takes 2 or 3 weeks in law school to try to explain to first-year law students. And that was 40 years ago for me, so I'm not sure if I even recall. But it truly, it's a very complex question. The general rule of thumb is federal law supersedes state law, but there's a ton of exceptions to that. So it's a complicated question.
So each issue or situation has to be looked at for its own merit rather than just the fact that it's federal law trumps state law.
Right, what it comes down to, it's a subject known as preemption, and it comes down to whether the federal government intended to preempt that area. And, the states can't touch it, local governments can't touch it, as opposed to whether it was more permissive. And in addition to so the best example I can give you is wage and hour laws. Federal government passes Fair Labor Standards Act, but there's nothing saying a state can't require a higher minimum wage or be more restrictive in terms of when overtime has to be paid. So that's an example of when the federal government says, yeah, you got to follow our laws, but you can also have more restrictive laws.
Thank you.
Sorry,
You have a follow-up question on that issue?
well, I have a follow-up, I have a question for, just to get a clarification on a statement you made before we went down this path, which was, I believe you said that, you're here. So what is the understanding of your understanding of the issues the board is questioning that you're talking about for state statute 10-220?
Well, the way it was explained to me is there was a specific issue around starting times, I think, and school schedules. And I understood there were some it led into sort of broader conversation about where does the authority of the board start and begin and the authority of the superintendent start and begin.
I think it goes much deeper than just basic start times.
Oh, I have no doubt.
Okay.
I mean, that's the impression I had, but
Well, okay, so.
I mean, I meant.
Well, no, I'm just, maybe, before you can answer a question, I think you need to know that.
I'm not sure I was given a specific
Okay.
question.
So,
Okay.
As much as I was
I'm just
asked
trying to
to
understand.
try to describe the roles and responsibilities to see if within that framework it helps you folks to decide.
may I ask a question that maybe,
Sure.
because I understand where you're coming from. And Is it fair to say that the board has the authority in areas that are not specifically stated in statute to determine how they want to develop that issue or set up that particular policy, which is maybe what we want to look at is policies that specifically cover areas that the board has in question so that we can determine for future issues how we should, who has the authority to do it. I do not, well, that's the question. We according to my understanding, if the statute doesn't specifically say you need to vote on a particular item, then it's up to the board to determine which items we want to vote on.
I think as a general statement, that is true.
All right. So, because I know there are so few statutes that require a vote by the board, and statute, I know, the only one that really comes to mind for me is in hiring the superintendent. That absolutely requires a vote of the board, and it says that in the statute.
Approval of collective bargaining agreements is another example, very specific. And, you know, I read the provision about curriculum and how that's developed. That's very specific. And there are other things. But, you know, here, I mean, I guess sort of cut to the chase. The issue is there's two schools of thought. One school of thought is you're given very specific statutory powers and authority. And if the statutes haven't given that to you, then you don't have it. And at the same time, the superintendent is vested with the day-to-day operation of the schools, right? What does that mean? There's no case law really describing what that means. So the question is, what does that mean? The other way of looking at it, which is the way you've described it, is to say, well, there's nothing saying we can't develop a policy on X, Y, Z. And I'll give you an example. Bridgeport Board of Education has two policies that come to mind, one of which says the board must review and approve any contract over $25,000. Now, in a lot of school districts, people would say, well, review of contracts and approval is the superintendent's purview, barring any restrictions. Now, that's not spelled out in the statutes, but Bridgeport said we want to have a very concrete rule when it comes to that, and they've adopted that rule. And they have other rules about hiring that go beyond what the statute specifically does. So, to my knowledge, nobody has ever said to Bridgeport or any other school district, you're limited to the exact words that are in 10-220. And, you know, for the most part, yes, there are issues that come up in districts over time. They get worked out. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of situations where the board is suing itself to get a declaratory judgment on the interpretation of a statute. Sometimes you see that between towns and boards of ed. Yeah, I would certainly agree that unless it's a specific responsibility, and I'll give you an example. Under 10-151, the superintendent and only the superintendent initiates a termination proceeding for a certified staff member. The board could not do that because the statute is very, very specific on that particular issue. The board plays a very specific role in that process, but it's the superintendent who initiates that process. So absent something specific like that, I'm not aware of any restriction or limitation. If this board says, here's a policy of, you know, things that we want to put in place and how things should be done, even if it gets down into, forgive the use of the term, micromanaging, to some degree, I think you have that prerogative. Is that the best thing for this district and generally in schools? And I'll leave that to others to decide. Yeah, I mean, I generally agree that's your prerogative.
Okay, before we go on any further, and if the board doesn't mind, I'll keep my mouth shut. You came here to present to us, and maybe we should let him present, and then we can answer questions or ask questions.
To some degree, we sort of cut to the last chapter, but let me just go back and touch on a couple other things, and then I'll answer any try to answer any questions that may have. The other very important and critical statute, well, two others that talk about what you do is 10-221, and the purists who, you go to a CABE or you go to National School Board Conference, what they'll tell you very broadly is the board's role is to develop policy, and the superintendent's role is to implement it and run the schools day to day. In Connecticut, the source for the reasoning or the rule about your role in terms of developing policy is in 10-221. And again, I'm just highlighting some key provisions, have not cherry-picked anything to any particular point. But boards of education shall prescribe rules for the management, studies, classification, and discipline of the public schools, and subject to the control of the State Board of Education, the textbooks to be used. Goes on to say, shall make rules for the control within their respective jurisdiction of the school library media centers, including internet access, and approve the selection of books and other education media therefore. Next paragraph, it goes on to say that you shall develop and adopt and implement written policies concerning, now it gets very specific here, homework, attendance, promotion, retention. Does that mean that's the end of the list? I don't think so, but it's very specific in terms of those items. But again, to the point we were talking about before, and you go beyond that, I'm not aware of any restriction. There are other things that it lays out, but maybe prescribe rules for sanctions imposed upon pupils who damage or fail to return textbooks, adopt and implement procedures for dealing with the use, sale, possession of alcohol or controlled drugs. But that's basically the principle that people look to and say your primary role is setting policy, reviewing policy. Part of that, setting goals for the school district and analyzing how you're doing relative to performance in those goals, and then going back and tweaking the policy. So that's the statement on the board's, I'll call it primary role, and as it relates to developing policies and procedures. Then, of course, there's the budget process, which you probably have PTSD over, but that's obviously a very critical role. And I mentioned the collective bargaining process. You have very specific roles in terms of that, very specific roles in terms of teacher terminations. But that's sort of the broad strokes of what you do. Now the question is, what does the statute say about the superintendent of schools? Okay. Each local or regional board of education shall provide for the supervision of its schools under its control by a superintendent who shall serve as the chief executive officer of the board. I've yet to see any regulations or case law that describes what that means, but anyway, that's what the statute says. It goes on to say the superintendent shall have executive authority over the school system and responsibility for its operation. It doesn't say responsibility for its supervision. It doesn't specifically say is responsible for the day-to-day operation of the schools, but that's how people, ever since I've been involved, have interpreted that. It goes on to say the board has to evaluate the superintendent. So, we have these broad statements about what the board's roles and responsibility are, some very specific things that the board is supposed to do. We also have the broad statement about maintain good public and secondary schools, which is a very broad statement. Yet another broad delegation of authority to the superintendent. So I guess I point to all that to say, let me just end. Also, as part of my role in delivering this sort of training, on pages 4 beginning on page 4 and going on to page 7, you'll see a chart that talks about responsibilities of Board of Education, responsibility of the superintendent of schools, and this is something that Dave has published at one time or another, probably with a couple of tweaks from me over the years, but nothing substantive. I could go through that, but, you know, it's, and I encourage you to, but it's not going to answer the kind of questions that I understand have come up here. And so I think at the end of the day, where I land on this issue is, you know, as you, Mr. Davis, you started to say before, there's nothing here that prescribes, other than specific statutory grants of authority to the superintendent, or whatever, that you cannot develop a policy or procedure on a particular issue that you think is, you know, best for the school district. And again, you know, I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, and my view is that I stick kind of to the policy day-to-day operation view of things, in part because I've just heard that espoused for a long time in doing this work.
What does that mean exactly?
What does that mean? Well, what that means is you set policy, the superintendent implements, follows the policy. And otherwise, the superintendent's responsible for the day-to-day operation of the school. You know, could I come up with a list of 100 specific items and tell you who it goes to? I can't. I'll tell you, I looked. I contacted CABE. They didn't have such a thing. In fact, at one point I realized there was supposed to be, I think it was the General Assembly, I believe, had delegated to the State Department of Education responsibility for doing that. I can't find the damn thing anywhere, excuse my French. So it hasn't happened. Then I reached out to the Council of School Attorneys, figured, well, certainly some other state has tackled this problem and taken it on, and I was not able to find anything similar. So it leaves a lot of room for discussion and a lot of room for what's best here. For whatever it's worth, my 2 cents, my view is things ought to be left to the superintendent. If you don't think the superintendent's doing what they should be doing, then there's a process. So that's the overview. Probably best just to try to answer any specific questions at this point.
Christian?
Oh, I was just taking up on the invitation to ask questions. Is that all right? I don't mean
Yeah, go for the question.
Like case law, right? So we've got, you know, the statute that we're looking at very scrupulously, both state and federal, but these issues have arisen to some degree in some context that have gone to our courts, and our courts have provided judicial gloss or otherwise instruction. You right, know exactly, because they're not always on point, it's always fact specific, but they can be extrapolated or interpreted to apply to situations where there were some question as to what the board responsibility was, right? So as far as case law goes, aren't there examples of cases where our courts, you know, as far as law goes, binding, you know, depending upon how far up you want to go, have determined that certain functions, like determining curriculum, how many teachers should be, you know, in a school system, line item veto of budget, those are powers that have been already determined by a democratic process of law to be within the elected officials of a board. Isn't that fair to understand?
Yes and no.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. I think you're talking about the Ellington case, among others.
A bunch of them.
Yeah. All the case law that I'm aware of is a fight between a town and a Board of Education. And the courts, you know, on the one hand, you have the Ellington Board of Education and the town of Ellington suing each other, and the court says, as between the two, the Board of Education has that right and responsibility. I'm not aware of a single case that talks about the roles and responsibilities between the Board of Education and the superintendent. And the other thing I'll say is even education lawyers, from time to time, will slip into referring to the school district or the, you know, Amity School District, you know, or even, the Milford Public Schools as the board. But it's not really the Board of Education. They mean the school district. So I take those cases with a grain of salt because I think people misuse the term board in those cases. And again, they're about disputes between a town and a board as opposed to, where does the line between a superintendent and the Board of Education fall?
Oh, no, that was great, but I don't want to dominate your time. I just want to circle back, but I also.
Thank you.
So I was trying to understand why you wouldn't have such a case law at all. I was thinking, and here is why I think, if the board and the superintendent cannot sue the board in practice because the superintendent would get fired if they did it, right? So how could you expect to have, how would you expect to have case law where a superintendent would go and find? That's why you don't have case law. You shouldn't find it.
Sure.
Case law.
Yeah.
I mean,
So maybe I'm wrong, but I just.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The superintendent would, they would have to literally sue the board in order to get a ruling. I'm trying to think of any other way, but that's the most likely way. And I mean, who's going to do that? And who pays for it?
Separate counsel, and then the superintendent's usually suing the board for wrongful termination or not enforcing a contract.
Yeah. I mean, these things are worked out for very practical reasons, such as you've noted.
And, to add to that, we also evaluate the superintendent's work based on an agreed-upon concept of what the superintendent should be doing and if the superintendent is doing that particular job. But to me, it looks like with certain boards of education, possibly ours, that we have board members that have a different view of what the role of the board is and what the superintendent is. And I think, and CABE actually does recommend this, the board and the superintendent should sit down together and work out those issues to the best possibility of their acceptance for both parties.
I agree 100%.
So that was what I was trying to get on at before. If we have a particular concern about what the superintendent is doing, and no one has ever accused the superintendent of doing something wrong, it's just that where the level of responsibility is, that should be determined at some point or other by agreement, similar to the things that we agree to in a contract. So that may be a policy listing some of those particular areas that would come up year after year after year. And maybe the board being put in the position of saying, okay, we'd like the superintendent to do this particular thing and bring it back to the board so we can approve it or reject it by vote. And that's, I think, where many of us would be looking for, okay, that's a reasonable solution.
That's exactly where we are.
Right.
We're at the point where the question is whether or not we can even have that vote. Do we even have the authority to bring that topic back to the board? So before we could, that's a very cooperative and democratic way of dealing with it, which is great. But the question is, can we even do that? And to answer that, we have to find out where the lines of demarcation sounds too hostile, where the board authority cedes to the day-to-day, which is the nebulous question at issue, administrative power of the superintendent. So it's almost like a circular.
I know, I agree. Let's go down. Carol, you, okay.
I think the you said something.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, as part of the superintendent's evaluation or performance, I think you could sit down in the context of, if this is how you want to do it, you could also do it very publicly. You could do it in an executive session under that and say, let's agree, the rules and develop what you've talked about here, and that's one way you could do that.
Just to finish up, Christian, with what you mentioned and what I mentioned, the concern here is that those guidelines, policies should be in place so that everybody knows what they're dealing with prior to the event happening. Mm-hmm. So that if the superintendent is instructed to do something she knows what is going to happen when she comes back to the board. Not that the board would suddenly change the rules while she's doing something that she's done before or working. So I'm agreeing with you, we should try and at least try to lay those guidelines and rules and policy, if not in policy, at least in agreement between the board and the superintendent in language that both of us agree to. And that way we don't run into that particular type of problem. And everybody understands what they're dealing with and voting for. And Megan?
So I feel like what I'm hearing you say is that the law isn't super specific and well-defined. It is
Right.
very broad, and the argument that we are collectively having as a board is not uncommon because of that. And so that within ourselves as a board, we need to define exactly what we want to operate.
100%.
And so by background, I'm a business person, so I'm used to dealing with lawyers where I say like, okay, this is the reality of the business situation, and then have you point me to what is best practice, what is the solution. And so I'm finding we're talking very much in the abstract right now and not touching on like what has actually transpired here. So I kind of have two separate lines of questioning. The first that we have been circling around for months is what is best practice around a budget? And does voting on a budget implicitly approve other things, such as a middle school schedule change that has curriculum changes and staffing changes and curriculum delivery changes? And I guess part of where this concern evolved from is that we weren't even brought what the middle school schedule was going to look like. It was kind of and this budget includes a change in the middle school schedule. And then as we started to ask questions about, well, why does the schedule change require 4 additional staff members? And then people were asking more questions, and so we requested a more detailed presentation on the schedule. And then out of that, we found out that it wasn't something many of the stakeholders wanted. And we actually had the teachers union email the board and say, everything they presented and said that we were in support of this is not true. And so that's where some of this is coming from, is there has been, and I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for the board, but I feel like our collaborative working relationship is not great. And I don't always feel like information is transparent and forthcoming. And sometimes I feel like it's deceptive. And so that is where this debate kind of evolved, I guess. And so, I basically was directly told where your vote on the budget was implicit approval for all of the above. And so, I don't know if that's kind of my business concern.
This is the issue that I was looking at also, because the superintendent, in presenting the way she did, is a practice that she's done for years, that the board has accepted for years. The fact that you look at it differently is not wrong, it's just different. And what I'm trying to get us all to look at is that we need to agree so that when the superintendent presents something, she knows exactly what the board is planning to do with it when she gets there. And as you said, some of the presentations that she made, not her particularly, but some of the presentations we received, you had questions about. I don't think there was one day where the questions were not answered, and because of all the questions the board had, without any vote at all, the superintendent and the administration went back and they made changes at our request. And I specifically remember, the board would like you to go back, they're not happy with what you've done, and they would like you to come back to the board with changes that address the concerns that were brought to our attention. And the concerns involved other things like scheduling and moving kids from class to class and special taking kids out of classes, additional language, additional physical education. Those were all things that we wanted to talk about, world language. And they came back with a totally different plan that really changed very, very, very little as I looked at it, the more I looked at it, but it did include 2 additional staff members. And I think, if I recall, and somebody may call me if I'm wrong, when we did finally vote on the budget, somebody asked the superintendent, how will this impact the middle schools? And the superintendent answer was a reply, we will work on it and get it done.
So I really.
Is that correct?
I think so, but I wanted to add one more thing, because this is a meeting that is on the record and words like deception, etc. have been used. I want to be very clear that many members of the board do not find that characterization
That's why I said
appropriate. And so I know you said that, but I also want to explicitly say that that characterization is not something that many of the members of the board, I don't know how many, but is not something that we would agree is the characterization. Yeah, I just want to say.
Kathy, do you have?
And I know she came back and presented, but the first round and the second round started to unravel and wasn't factual. We had teachers who supposedly were all approving this plan, and they were sitting here, and it's very threatening for them to sit here and say, I have no idea. We had the teachers' union saying, we don't support this. So that kind of conversation drives us to ask the next question, and the next question, and the next question, for clarity.
Right. Yeah, that's fine, but people are entitled to respond or make their own statements, and whether or not we accept or reject those statements is really up to us. The one question we didn't ask is, did the teachers' union accept the last offer? I don't know, Jen.
You have asked that question.
Did they?
So there is nothing enumerated in their contract that prevents schedule changes.
Right.
And so, and so I haven't, and I know that they've been, the teachers union has been part of the meetings that the middle school principals had with teams of teachers. I haven't heard one way or another, because it's not a contractual violation to change the schedule.
So basically,
I don't have an answer.
So basically, the board may or may not be aware of this. Teachers really have no say in their schedule or what they're teaching other than their certified area. They may be asked if they prefer this or what they're doing, but if the administrator has to appoint them to teach a class, as long as they're certified to teach it, and they, are in a position where they don't have another choice, basically. And the principals also are responsible for the scheduling in the middle schools and the high school. You don't do that.
No, not at all.
So because I do remember you saying you were, this is really coming from the middle school principals. But, once again, I don't like what I'm doing here, because our board meeting is supposed to be about policy and getting legalities and things like that. And Carol, you've had your hand up patiently, and Donna, we go.
Thank you, Paul. So I just want to say that based on what I've heard from Attorney Dugas, there's no statute that specifies us voting on particular issues minus the ones that we mentioned. And I think on purpose. Then we talked about if there's case law that can help us here, and no. And yes, Sudhir, I agree with you, because one, we hire the superintendent, we evaluate the superintendent, so there's a process in place if we are pleased or displeased. So, yeah, I would imagine there is no case law to help us in this situation. I think it sounds like we vote, we make a decision to vote if we want to. If that is what this board decides to do, we can, because there's no state statute or anything that says that we can't. It doesn't say we can't either, so it seems as though that is left to us. I think it's also important to remember that, or to acknowledge that the statutes are not, everything is not like over-specified, and that's on purpose. That is to give each board freedom to set their own norms and their own ways of working.
So I don't see this as a, oh, what does the statute say, whatever. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is about ways of working. And this is about this board figuring out what are the ways of working that we want. Who cares if we, who cares if we vote? We evaluate the superintendent once a year, a formal evaluation. We renew the superintendent's contract every year. Like, what is the, I guess I just don't understand the battle over voting. It's inconsequential. I'm sorry. We're a board of education. There's state statute that spells out specific things. And frankly, we are in the ultimate, in this relationship, we are in the ultimate position of power. So I guess the more time we spend on this, I'm like, what are we doing? Why? We have a process in place, and again, if we want, we can spend time and talk about how do we want to work? What are our ways of working here, the Amity Board of Education, Region 5?
Donna?
Wow, okay, Carol. Well, that's gonna be a tough one to follow. So, a couple of things. I think we can close the loop around the teachers. I think that's just a simple question going back to the AEA, because the schedule has changed. And that, to the point is that this was the first opportunity that Attorney Dugas could join us. And that's why it's felt so delayed and we're sort of dragging this out. So when the question first came about, I did contact CAVE, I shared this with the board, and they said, of course, any board can override any administrative decision. That is something that, of course, we can do. Other boards have overridden administrative decisions, just most recently even Stanford around their school schedule. So there's something we can get some clarity from Attorney Dugas is, something he said was setting goals for the school district. Bless you. And that is something that the board does, correct? So we have a strategic plan, but the board has never actually approved the strategic plan. And so this is part of something that's actually in our strategic plan, is to change the middle school schedule. And it was actually slated for 26-27. And I think that's where all of this came from, because it felt very conceptual, and I come from a world where I'm an implementer. So I start to look for perhaps the challenges, and as well as, implementing something very smoothly, because in my world, my job was on the line, and millions of dollars as well that I was accountable for. So I guess the question isn't really, do we have the authority to vote, and should we vote? It is maybe a little bit of some board members not feeling as if they're not really part of the conversation and being brought along, and it's by the way, where an effective board would not have to feel like they need to vote because they were brought along in the conversation. And it sounds more to me at this point that it's like the board's sitting down and setting goals for the school district. But part of that is still understanding what is the goal of changing the middle school schedule. That's something that I still feel a disconnect, other than some things that were presented to us were choice. Now, how you implement choice and how this impacts our teachers, I think it does matter, because we have morale, and we don't want to lose our valuable teachers as well, especially in an environment where it is not necessarily easy to fill those vacant positions. So I'm just going to leave it there. I think that it's setting the goals as well. Do I believe that the board has the authority? Do I believe the state statute implicitly outlines this? To your point, no. Do they? Of course they do. And how a board wants to move ahead is a board decision. And I think that's something that needs to be decided by this board, but also there is value in setting our goals as per the school district, and I don't know if that's actively been done recently.
No, I can answer that question. The board has had these same 3 goals since before I was hired. I know they were the goals of my predecessor. And I think we have at times tried to have goal-setting sessions, but we just haven't actually gone to a point of actualizing new goals, but it's been they're in the superintendent's report each month, it's the same 3 goals that we've had before.
Right, so I think what I would ask the chair and this board is to actually set aside time for self-evaluation, for setting goals.
Yeah, we just, right.
And then just also trying to develop, just identify how the board wants to work collaboratively together
Right.
amongst ourselves and with the superintendent.
Right. One of the clarifications, I know you and I have talked about this a lot, is self-evaluation. I looked at our bylaw, our policy on self-evaluation, which we both have seen. The self-evaluation is more related to the full board, how the board works together, rather than individual board members. We're not evaluating board members, we're evaluating the board as a whole and how we act together, which I think is really the more important way to handle this. And if we can look that up, I certainly agree we need to set aside time to do that. But you know, we're all now getting to the same place. We have to find a way to work together to not only work together among ourselves, but work together with the superintendent. And after working with the superintendent for the number of years I've been here, at least this superintendent, she's tremendously flexible when it comes to listening to people and making changes if they need to be made.
Chairman Davis, with all due respect, point of order, we're here to precious limited time with
You're right,
Attorney
you're right.
Dugas.
Okay, good point of order. Thank you.
Kathy.
Kathy.
Yeah, so I think, stepping back, right? I think we need to, as a board, right, she has to run the school. I get that. I think we need to get some clarity among ourselves on things of magnitude, right? If they have magnitude, the board should be involved and should approve, right? Magnitude, right? Not the day-to-day, right? And some of these issues, like we felt the middle school changes, because it started to unravel, was a magnitude. It's not about her wanting to do change. We just felt the magnitude seemed to grow every board meeting, right? So that's just one thing. And then all of the stuff we talk about, policy versus regulation, it's a magnitude, right? That's a decision that collectively we need to talk about. So that's my position.
Jen.
Attorney Dugas, you mentioned micromanaging sort of in passing. And I guess one of my questions is, and it sounds like from what we've been talking about, there might not be much guidance, but is there some guidance based on other school districts similar to ours, regional school districts versus, sort of just general school districts, of like where that line is? Because I think one of the things that we're struggling with is kind of when do we get into the weeds too much? And does that then cause an adversarial relationship with the administration, with the superintendent? And I know, Donna, you mentioned sort of morale with teachers, and I think that's obviously something we have to worry about, but we also have to worry about, because we hire the superintendent, that we don't create this adversarial relationship where then we do an evaluation, but she also evaluates whether she wants to be here. And then the next person who is looking at this job says, I've watched some of these meetings and this is not a good situation. I don't want to work at this, in this district. So the micromanaging line seems to be an important one for us to think about in terms of when are we getting too into the weeds, and like, is there even just some broad strokes where it's like, this is not things that are really in our authority?
I think Kathy, comment about the magnitude is what we really have to look at. What is an important enough change, or a large enough change, or a change that impacts so many that the board needs to consider it. And that could be the basis of what we sit down with and make a determination.
Yeah, but let me try to answer your question. No, there's nothing I can point you to say, here's the line and here's what it is. Right. What I can tell you, in my experience, and keep in mind, while I work you know, closely with superintendents. I represent boards. I represent you guys. And when this issue has come up, what I would say is, the further you got into the weeds, the more problems it created. So it's up to you guys to decide, you know, how far down you go.
All right.
Created or discovered?
Created. I mean, sometimes they discover it too, but more often it creates distrust. I mean, you know, if you're at that level, there's some level of distrust, and there's a fundamental problem that needs to be discussed and dealt with.
Right, I think to that point,
I-
Hold on. Dana?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the middle school schedule and with the things that kind of just came up that we weren't aware of, and Jen did change it after the request was made, but when you come here and don't expect to see almost an entire department come to speak out about something that's gonna be part of that middle school change and also part of the budget that we're gonna vote on, it's disconcerting because we didn't know about it or we weren't aware. And to see most of a department come to speak about it, and they don't really come to these meetings, that's where you start to develop, we didn't know about this, or we weren't aware about it. And again, the high-level presentations are great, and maybe we would have just went along with it, but then when a whole department comes out to speak about it, it's concerning. Dr. Byers did address the issue, and she did change it, but that's where you sit and say, well, what else is in there that I don't know about? Or that may be hugely impactful to the students or to the faculty. And then it kind of leads me back to the budget where, well, if we approved that and all that happened, and then we found out that the department was upset, now it puts us in a place where, well, we approved it. So, you know, I think that's where a lot of the feeling of the surprise, or we found out about it, not the surprise, we didn't know about it and it kind of came about.
Donna and then Sudhir.
so I just want to talk about the budget. So first of all, my understanding is when a board approves a budget and it passes referendum, the number is approved, but things can always get moved around, whether it's supporting X, Y, or Z.
Subject to whatever your internal rules are, yes.
Right, okay, so, but just wanted to address that before I lost that train of thought. The other is that, you know, you were talking about, you know, getting into the weeds and micromanaging, but sometimes you can, you know, the other argument is that the devil's in the details. And as elected board members representing our towns, we are also parents. And so we happen to know the details because we have kids who are actually in the middle school. So when we're being presented with something, as an implementer, I am sitting here thinking about, wow, that's not the experience we currently have. And those changes and how those changes will change the experience that future students will have. And what does that overall mean to the educational outcome and experiences of these students? That, you know, I won't have any more students as, you know, I won't have any skin in the game. But there are other people who will have skin in the game. And so I am thinking about that. So it's, you know, the other argument is the devil is in the details. And so understanding this is not necessarily micromanaging to address that point or getting into the weeds. It's fully understanding the impact and the implications of such decisions.
Okay, Sudhir.
So I think it boils down to what Carol said, what kind of a board do we want to be? And I don't want to take away from your time because this is not a legal matter and you wouldn't be, but you've told us, like, you know, what good boards do. And one of the concerns that I have is anything that involves an iterative process, where it's easy to say when everybody is going to be happy, they can propose, no teacher is going to be. There'll be some departments who will be upset, right, about something that involves changes. So when such things happen, we are going to have people who are going to be upset. And we want an administration to come in with what's and all, you know, come to us open-minded, talk about innovation. right? Because the goal of the board is to create a place for innovation where you can be transparent, where you have a give and take, where you will not say, well, you didn't tell me something, therefore you must have been deceptive, or whatever the words we want to use. And that means every administrator is going to not want to make any kind of change because it is going to be a situation where, hey, why do I want all this trouble, right? And that is what a good board should do, is to promote an environment of innovation. And so I'm extremely worried, right, when we create a setting. It's not just that they will get fired, that person will not come. It's just that we will not know for 10 years there is no innovation really happening because we are not looking for innovation. We are only looking for, is there a problem in the budget? Is there a line that you spent a little extra? Those are the things that we can look for. We cannot look for the things that we want the school administration to do. And I would like to be, and this is where the collaboration and trust is important. It's not just that, what comes out is important. It's to give an environment where mistakes can happen. And that is okay, as long as they're willing to change. And from my perspective, that I think is important. And I don't know, again, this is not a legal issue, but you've seen things across the boards. And is that what you mean by when people get into the words, things get bad?
Yeah, the things, it's going to sound, I hope this doesn't happen here, but, I've had school districts where the board chair would literally come in and sign off on all accounts payable. And aside from the fact that it held things up.
That is treasurer.
That would be bad if that wouldn't happen here.
I mean, it doesn't hold them up processing it. Go in and sign them.
It's sort of, you have to be careful that what you do doesn't undermine the authority of the decision maker, because it can. If there's some school districts where teachers' unions in particular, not to pick on teachers or unions, but they'll run to the board when they don't like a decision of the superintendent, and it just takes the legs out from the superintendent. And, so you have to be careful of that kind of a thing.
Just, at least from my perspective, sometimes I think we need to insulate ourselves from some of the people that we speak to. I think almost every board member here has, at one time or another, spoken to an individual and come back here and said, these people are concerned with this particular issue. And we just did it tonight. The teachers don't like that, or the administrator does not appreciate it, or the bargaining unit says no, it shouldn't be done that way.
Well, with all due respect, we're elected officials by the people in town. That is our job, to represent their concerns.
Not necessarily. Our first job is to act as agents of the state. And sometimes we have to say to the person who is asking us to do something, say, listen, if this is really, really important to you, write me a letter, write the board a letter, come to public comment, and let the board know that this is a real concern. Because we don't know how many people we're talking to. We hear a very, very small group of people, 13 of us, that may bring this back to us, while there may be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people are saying, hey, you guys are doing a great job. I don't want to see anything changed. Or even with this schedule. We have people saying, I like the schedule, and people who say I don't. And they're outside of our circle here. And for the most part, we don't know whether a majority like it or whether a majority don't like it. It's just not good enough for us to just depend on what people are saying and how they feel. We need to explore what the particular change or what the thing that we're doing, how it's going to impact our students. That is where we need to place our best efforts. And it may not be something that we like as individuals.
I actually have students and hear from students.
Yeah, well, that's good.
I know this is not my meeting, but I don't know if that you insulate yourselves from people, honestly, and this has been the hard part, right, of transitioning from being a teacher to a assistant principal to a principal to right up the chain. It's that you almost have to train yourself to, you can't just stay in your sphere, you have to kind of really look at the broader sphere. And I always say that, and when parents come and they're upset, when they come to my office and like, I'm complaining about this thing, they argue from the point of view of their child or the child they know, and I always say, but I have to look at it from the perspective of all 2,400. And what does that mean for all 2,400? And I think that's where we sometimes, I think, have to, I don't know, that's where I think the switch is sometimes, and it's hard to do that. And I don't know, I'm sorry, Flo, I didn't mean to take up your time, but that's kind of.
Somewhere buried in my presentation is a point about that, which is, you no longer represent a specific school, much more applicable again to a typical local school district, but your interests are, it's not your child, it's, I don't mean to limit it to that, but the focus is what's in the best interest of all these kids. I recently had to make a decision in my law firm that was against my personal interest, but it was in the best interest of everybody. And to use that analogy, once you get put on the board, when you're in this room, you walk out the door, you're absolutely a parent. But in this room, you aren't. You're board members and you're doing what's in the best interest of everyone.
Okay, Kathy?
Just one more comment. So, having been on this board a while, right, and we've gotten new members, I think culturally, the board has a lot of passion, right? It wasn't quite as passionate in the past, right? And so that's a new thing that Jen is going to learn working with us, and we're going to learn driving her.
I think she's learned already.
to neutralize our passion. But, I mean, Paul, you've even said, this has never come up before. We've never done this before, right? Because we continue to challenge. So it's in good spirit, and I think we need to understand, back to what I said before, the magnitude.
And from my perspective, that's helpful, right? Because what I have are 8 years of different board members. They change every 2 years. And so there are things that would have been acceptable from one set of board that is different from a different. I will argue, I think all of the boards I've had have been passionate, just in different ways.
We're a little
differently passionate.
But that's why I think sometimes there are different expectations, or I have a different set of expectations from a new board. And when I say new board, it's a new board every 2 years, because even if some of you stay or some of you run more than one term, collectively, I don't think of you as individuals. You are the board, and you change every 2 years. That's where that kind of getting back to, I think, Floyd's, that's a point around sort of some guidance helps.
All right, I didn't see any rule that says we have to stay here till 8:30.
Can we ask a question not related to that?
Yeah, that's what
I
I was
also
gonna.
want to just make a comment. I think maybe I was misunderstanding because I thought we asked for the attorney to come because we had concerns, not more of that it was going to be him telling us, his presentation. I thought, that's why we had questions for you that directly affect us and may help us work better together as a board. So that when we come here, we actually have an idea of, yes, we can do that, no, we can't. And Paul, just to go back, and I hate to reiterate, you were not happy with the phys ed situation that came up with the budget. You openly spoke about it, and the change was made. Now, if we didn't ask as a board for that presentation to be done in a deeper dive, we really wouldn't have known about that. So I get it that, you don't want us to get into the minutia, but sometimes you need to, and that was a bigger, broader situation that you wouldn't have known about had we not had that big presentation where we got into the details.
I think.
Pat, yeah, you haven't spoken.
I agree with so much that everyone's saying, and I think that, for me, I feel like the issue over the last couple of weeks or months has been what getting into the minutia means. I agree that we all wanted to hear more information about the budget, or about the middle school change, because we had concerns. And many of us didn't like the changes, and we requested those changes be made, and they were made. And I think that, for me, the minutia becomes voting on different, making it a point that we're gonna vote on every little thing, because that's my concern. And having been, I hear a lot of people talking about their experience. My experience is being in education for the last 20 plus years of seeing schedule changes and actually living through them. And that what's gonna happen is, there are gonna be things that are gonna need to change with this schedule. And I would rather have our administration be able to say, this isn't working, we're changing it today. And have that flexibility without having to say, oh, you know, we need to knock 3 minutes off this class so that the kids can get to lunch, and we can't do that because I have to take it to the board. And
We
that.
don't get that detailed, though. We don't get that detailed. We don't get that detailed that she'd have to come back to us to give us 3 more minutes.
No, but, so, hear me out. What I'm saying, what we're saying is, we want to vote on schedule changes. And getting into the minutia means, once we start taking that, getting rid of the dialogue between the superintendent and us and saying, you're running this, hey, we heard about this part, we didn't like it. I'll tell you, I reached out to the superintendent before any of the things and said, I heard about some of this change and I have concerns, can you talk to me about this? And I said I wasn't happy, but and what happened was, we all came together, we talked, and changes were made. And what I'm advocating for is a dialogue. I think that once we can all get together, I think we've all said that when we can get along, when we talk, we have much better interactions.
Well, you know, giving Christian the credit here, he was the one that mentioned, he thought the way we handled the budget was an outstanding example of being able to come together and do that.
Just like with the proposed schedule change here, which brings us to our conversation I wanted to circle back with you on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Is that all right? Yeah, thanks. No, and that was, hey, look, you know what, the board has a vote, and the vote is the voice of the board. That is the only way we can fulfill our elected function, is to vote. I mean, we can hang out and talk, but until we vote, we're not doing anything. So our vote is super important, and that's how we, be redundant, fulfill our roles. When it comes to our authority, you know, who has the final say? It sounds so totalitarian, and that's not really the way we function, I think, as a unique group and with the superintendent. But there came a time when our superintendent, who, very capable and adept, said, hey, I've got a great idea, this is what we're gonna do. And there were some board members who said, that sounds pretty cool, and there were other board members who said, I don't know, I got some issues with that, right? And then some questions were sent out, some information came back, and some board members said, hey, you know, I don't know anything about running a school. We hired a great person. I don't feel comfortable trying to get involved with the superintendent's thoughts on the matter. I'm just gonna sit back and let our hire do what she thinks is appropriate. And I'm gonna essentially, again, extreme term, abdicate my elected official authority on voting on the matter because I think we have a great superintendent and she knows better than me. And there were others amongst us who thought, man, this is interesting, but it should change in this way or that way, or I have an issue with it. So the real question came down to, where does the board, and this again sounds so totalitarian, have a final say? Where is it that the superintendent can say, I've got great ideas, and you know what, you've given me the budget to work within, and I'm using the same number of teachers, and I am gonna make some changes that may impact curriculum and assignment of teachers and possible class allocations, some things that go beyond just what you see every day. And that's where I know you had said, Floyd, that, hey, we could pass a policy, that's kind of retroactive. And then even if we tried to pass a policy, wouldn't the superintendent theoretically be within her rights to say, hey, you guys are encroaching. Your policy is going too far. Your policy is saying you as a board have authority over my day-to-day functions that you really shouldn't have to. You're overreaching, right? So that's why we're here to determine, is this something we can even vote on? And that's what Paul, what you were saying was with the budget, we said, you know what, we have disagreements, we're not sure what we should do, let's vote on it. And you know, kind of how we'll function. That's what we did. I thought we did a great job discussing and coming up with a majority, you know, Democratic resolution. And so that's kind of what we want to do here. But the question to council, I think, is, do we even have the authority to do that? Can we sit and talk amongst ourselves and say, you know what, we are as a board going to decide by a majority vote whether or not we can have the final say on this proposed change to our school function curriculum?
If I may, Attorney Dugas, please. So I just want to say quickly, Christian, I disagree that voting is the only way that we can fulfill our duties. We have the final say on everything, whether we vote or not. That is how I see us as a board function. So I don't need to feel like I'm voting, to feel like I'm fulfilling my function as an elected board member. So that's one. So
What do you mean by final say?
Well, what does he mean by final say? Well, the same thing he means is final say. So if for example, if we voted for the budget, to pass the budget, if in July we were like, we think this schedule is terrible, do we actually think that that schedule would be rolled out? Really, I think we should, you don't have to answer that, but do you actually think it would be rolled out? Let's think about who we are. Again, I'm gonna repeat, ultimately, in this relationship, we are in the ultimate position of power, and I feel like this back and forth with like, are we gonna vote? Christian, I said earlier, it doesn't say whether we should vote or not. It's a matter, we can make the choice about whether we want to vote. But I guess I don't understand this, it appears to me to be like a grab for power that we already have.
Well, I think it's because the chair told all of us that we don't have the authority to do that.
And we don't
So
always
that's
agree.
where the question came from. And I think what we learned tonight is that we have the authority we decide that we have as a board within a very broad.
I don't recall I ever said the board doesn't have the authority to do that.
So let me try to answer
I never
both of
said
you,
that.
if I could.
No, let's
So,
not get into it.
I think the best way to do what you're talking about is through policy, okay? It gives you the opportunity to deliberate rather than deal with an issue that's right before you in a meeting. Is there anything stopping you from saying, you know, I move, it's on the agenda and it's not a special meeting, it's being added, and it's on topic, you know, I move that we direct the superintendent to do X. Do you have that authority? With limited exceptions, probably. And what I say to superintendents in that situation is, you've got a choice. You either say, I'm going to exercise my authority to run the day-to-day, or get in a bind with your board, which is gonna play out later on. I mean, but, you know, again, I'll point out, if you've got, well, I'll just leave it at that.
Can I ask, how do we as a board speak if we don't vote? How can we have any impact if we isn't by consensus, either majority, unanimous, or otherwise? Do we have the fulfillment of policy or role or direction to our superintendent if we don't vote? Because we have a lot of different opinions.
Well, you certainly have the ability to express that when there's an issue on the agenda, and when it comes up to discussion of that issue, that's certainly the opportunity. But, you know, and again, if it's something that can wait, that's something that can be addressed in policy. If it's something that you don't think can wait, you know, again, I'm not aware of anything that says you can't. Again, if it's on the agenda, have a motion and give some very clear direction to the superintendent, and then it's probably in his or her interest to follow it.
The motion's voted on. In your 40 years of experience, have you ever seen any school board that functioned without voting?
Without voting?
Yes.
No.
Yeah, but can I-
Hold on,
can I just?
Pat has not spoken very much tonight, so.
I agree with Christian that, yes, our voice is through voting, but the question is, do we need to vote on whether or not we have softer toilet paper in the bathroom? And I think that is what, and that's what I'm getting back to. So I agree, we do, we exercise our vote. Ultimately, we exercise our vote when we renew the superintendent's contract. And that's the thing. And for me, I feel like we spend so much time on this. Running, I feel like we accomplished, I do. I feel personally that there were things that I wanted to see change in the schedule, and I was happy with the changes we were able to make without having to vote on it. I feel like we've spent so much time worrying about whether or not we should be voting on all these things instead of just focusing on the day-to-day, getting this school system to be even better than it is.
Okay, Dana and then Jen.
So we keep going back to policy and the superintendent executing the policy and regulations. So if a policy is set and, well, maybe I should put it this way. Who sets the policy?
The board.
Who sets the execution of the policy, or I've heard regulation of the policy?
Well, there's two things. Execution of the policy is solely the providence of the superintendent. It is common for there to be regulations that detail how you accomplish the policy. Okay, a lot of policies, some policies are 3 or 4 sentences, but you've got to tease out a whole bunch of stuff. And, frankly, a lot of times when we advise boards on policy changes, adopting policy, whatever, there's different schools of thought, but certainly my school of thought is keep it simple, stupid. Because there's things you can tweak in regulations without having to go through the amendment of the policy process. And a lot of times, those things can change pretty frequently, a couple times during the course of a year. So that's just, I hope that answers your question, but that's how I view it.
So,
Are you going to continue on that?
Yeah, I have the
Yeah, because
same-
I was going to ask another question,
So-
but maybe she's going to ask it.
what is the adoption process for regulations? Is it you write it and you adopt it?
It's, I could be wrong, but I think it's different for every board because ours is defined in our bylaw. And in the Amity bylaw, I just write and implement the regulations.
So then what
So-
happens if a regulation is in conflict with board policy and or law?
It shouldn't.
So what is the process for handling that?
I've never had that come up.
Well, it's coming up right now.
Give us your guidance.
You could amend your
This is
policy
a,
to clarify.
this is a particular case that we can do something about. If the board wishes to vote on regulations, superintendent presents the regulation to the board, and the board votes on it. You can set that up in policy without any problem at all.
I mean, I can give you,
Or
I
put
can give you a
it's there.
simple example, but it's
already
not a
there.
hot
We
topic.
have
That we can vote on
policy
regulations.
right now,
Right.
the circumstance we're talking about.
So for a good, 15 years, every single year, the state, by statute, would change the graduation requirements. At one point, the Amity.
And that's to the policy, like they changed the policy?
No, the state law would change every
Okay.
year. And at one point, and we have a chart of like what the graduation requirements are. And at one point, that was part of the board's policy. So every year, I would bring it to policy committee, we would go through first read, we would go through second read, and then by January, our policy would catch up to the state statutes for the kids that were graduating that year, and we would have accurate graduation requirements. At some point, the board said, this is stupid. They change every single year. Take that chart out, put it in as a regulation, and in July, when those new graduation requirements come in, just change the regulation, and that's what we did. So that's kind of, so to answer your question, that's how fast a regulation can change, is that if it's misaligned, if state statute changes, if, a new law comes into play, I send it off to either CABE, we usually push something out right away. If they don't, I can send it to Floyd and his firm, and I say, tell me how to change the regulation based on this. So it's a much faster process, and that's why it exists, is because it deals with things that change quickly.
Right, so actually graduation requirements is a policy that it's on our agenda, and it's been on our agenda, and the concern was brought by a letter from a parent that actually our graduation requirements should be set by the board, because the board actually issues the diplomas, and that our graduation requirements go well beyond what the state statutes requirements are. And so maybe simply, we can either do it through policy or the approval of regulations, because we get the updated state statutes come June. You can move on them pretty quickly, it doesn't have to be January. If it's simply, this year, state statute is, we no longer require 2 languages to graduate, 2 years of language to graduate. Now we only require 1, which is actually what has happened. And so then you just simply say, oh, great, it's a simple one, first read, second read, and then you implement it. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a January type of thing.
So again, just to give you an example of sort of how regulations can be adjusted quickly.
Right, and to Kathy's point, after having experienced some of us for more than one term, that you're learning how we like to do things, and that we're not necessarily previous boards.
Is it safe to assume that you don't have to bring the regulations to us when you change them? Because I'm assuming a lot of regulations change often?
Yes.
So if a regulation
So right
changes.
now, your bylaw just says I can change a regulation. So again, another example, right, we're doing that summer geometry course for kids who want to sort of accelerate. Our old regulation, until I changed it, said that any classes taken during the summer wouldn't count for credit. And that seems foolish to me that we're having kids take one of our classes in the summer for acceleration and not counting it for credit. So I changed the regulations so that an Amity class taken at Amity will count for credit.
Well, what is the procedure that you just take the need for the change and bring it to the attorney for approval, or?
If I think it needs to go to the attorney, in this case, I sort of ran it by the principal and our director of counseling and Shannon and said, does this make sense if we want to have these kids earn credit for summer geometry? So, yeah, I think it depends on kind of what's in the regulation and sort of who has that, like where it's, sort of the level, I guess, the level of the magnitude, as Kathy put it.
Not that a parent would take issue with that, but if they did, who has ultimate responsibility legally for what's in regulations?
I'm not sure what you mean by legally, but if the superintendent were to change that rule, it would be applicable.
We would change the policy, right? We would edit
Well, I
the
mean,
policy
in
if
the-
it was an issue.
In the regulation. The other thing, by the way, is I would think that your regulations are published on your online policy, with the regulations, so they are.
They're
They're
linked.
linked as like a
They're linked, they're
footnote.
not actually in it.
So can I? So one thing.
No, they're linked.
So one thing that struck, again, this is, since we are having a broader conversation, one thing that struck me was like, hey, several of us are passionate about several things, and that is true. And and that means, in one way, the interpretation is that depending on what we are passionate about, we're going to change the way the board operates. And there is a part of me that believes that an institution that has lasted for 70 years should not change every time just because 2 board members or 3 board members changed. Because an institution should be reasonably stable in the way it operates. And so I'm a bit worried about this idea that, we are going to think that everything can be brought to policy because, so in these kinds of examples, like suppose we decide that we are going to make a policy change about a curriculum and and that we need to break, and then she decides there has to be a change in the way the syllabus is brought, and now we have to bring it back because we've created a policy. I think best practice would be to really think hard, not because we are particularly interested in an issue or something like that, as to what is the problem that we are trying to solve. And I heard the word abdication. I don't view that as abdication at all. I view it as an important way in which we can practically run the organization in the most efficient way by always asking the question, by not writing a policy, are we really creating a problem? Is there something that is there? Rather than saying, we want to have some control over something. We're doing the same thing with the hiring of administrators. Why? What is the problem we are trying to solve? And I think if we did that, I think we would be much, it's hard for me to believe that 70 years of this institution, all the boards before somehow did not know, and suddenly we have some new wisdom. And I think we have to be very careful, and we have to be very slow, conservative, conservative in how we think about managing things. If it is somehow, in this case, if it was pointed out to me that there was something really, really bad that would have happened about the middle school schedule, and the superintendent would not change something that we all agree is important, and we had a vote. If 7 of us think that, that this schedule should not go, we could stop the superintendent from doing it. We don't want to take a vote and create a precedent around it, because that means then she'll have to come back to us if she wants to make a minor change when there is a mistake. So I think it's the reason I don't want a vote, the reason I don't want a new policy is because I want to preserve the flexibility in this case for a change. And so it's a very carefully thought out position. I want to be very clear. My lack of interest in taking a vote is not because of abdication, but because I carefully thought through it and believe that might be in the best interest of the board and the school district. And I want to explain that.
Patrick, in Paul's absence.
Yes.
Good question. Floyd, as Sudhir was saying, I think, he just thought, hey, we could have a vote to stop something if we thought that it was not desirable, harmful or whatever. And that's what we're asking. Can the board have a vote, or is what we're talking about day-to-day operations? So, I think Sudhir is kind of agreeing with the question or the answer question, saying, we could have this vote. We do have the authority, but we choose not to exercise it because we're afraid it might be perceived as a lack of confidence in our superintendent. So unless there's some problem, we're gonna sit back and let her do her best, and then if something goes wrong, then we at least know we've got the emergency thing on a bus. We can pull that, have a vote and say, hey, we have the authority to make you stop. Well, the question is whether or not we even have that authority, or whether it's day-to-day operations. And I think what you said is that unless there's some authority specifically statutorily delegated to the superintendent, we, the board, through policy, can define what day-to-day operations are.
Can you define what they, I suppose the answer is yes.
Thanks.
We always have the authority.
So I think one of the examples of how we use our voice without voting that came up recently was the AI issue. We had multiple people come for public comment. I asked for it to be put on an agenda. We had a discussion. It's going to policy. Eventually, we will vote on the policy, but the issue itself, we shared our concerns and we shared basically to policy, but as a group. And then the other thing that I was very surprised at when I went to the CABE training was that we as board members are allowed to participate in public comment. We are not board members when we make public comment. We are constituents and parents and things like that. But that is another way that we can, as board members, share our points of view when it's not on the agenda, when it's not, a policy or something we're voting on. We can still share our opinion as parents, right? And public comment is one of the ways that we can do that. I was very surprised, and I'm assuming I'm correct, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong. But that's another thing that we can think about, that if you're very passionate about something, when I wasn't sure it was gonna get on the agenda, I was gonna get up and talk about my concerns about AI. And that's something, as board members, we can think about too. We still have our voice as parents and as community members, even if it's not something that there's an arena for at a board meeting.
Jen,
I think another way that you also make your voice heard without a vote are your goals. That to me is a very clear way that sort of sets the direction and goals. So getting back to Donna's sort of point around goal setting and evaluation, your goals are a very, right, and we put them up at the start of the budget, and we say the budget's aligned to the goals. That's actually a pretty critical way that I think you make your sort of voice and direction heard without that vote.
Don't we have to draft them together and then vote together to say yes?
Eventually, yeah, sort of like the policy, you do vote on, but yes, but I think, you get what I'm saying, it's sort of a different approach to kind of say, this is what we value and is of importance to us.
All right, so Carol, I just wanted to ask, what did you mean by without voting?
So we have the final say.
Yeah.
Oh, just saying that we can share our voice through dialogue. We can talk to the superintendent, just like we went back and forth about the schedule to say, oh, no, we didn't don't like that. Can you change this? Can you change that? And it happened. We didn't vote, but she made all the changes that we wanted. So that's what I mean. It doesn't always have to, we don't have to vote. We have the ultimate power here. There's a process in place for everything. We have the final say. We're ultimately responsible, right? The attorney's the board's attorney, right? We are ultimately responsible. So that's what I mean. So yes, I'm sure statutorily there's something like budget, whatever, but there's so many ways that we can express our perspectives and get things done without a vote.
Okay.
So when you were at the CABE meeting and they talked about public comment, because I was always under the interpretation that we couldn't speak at public comment being a sitting board member.
We've had board members do that.
Yeah, especially as a parent.
Excuse me, let me finish asking the question to my fellow board member. When you were up there, did they say that your question had to be agenda related? Or could it be something that was not on the agenda?
I think that's based on the board rules.
Yeah, it would be whatever your rules are in public comment.
So what are our
I think
rules in public
special
comment?
is.
Yeah, there is what we have for this special meeting is a limited public comment to the agenda, but in our regular meetings, we never do that. Anybody can come up and talk.
Special meetings is limited to the agenda.
We're doing it that way.
And regular
Meetings,
meetings.
any subject area.
Which is every other, right?
Okay, yeah.
And
And
by
I
the way,
just wanna
that's-
tie-
That's not in law.
No, that's the way we do it.
That's we.
That's the way we do
It's
it.
your bylaw.
And there are times when we don't have public comment at all, if it's, it's a desire to focus on something else, so.
I just want to tie one more thing because there's a lot of passion about voting. And I don't feel like we vote on a lot of things. I feel like that's one thing that we don't really do is vote on a lot of things unless it's policy, the transfers, moving
Business
the money around,
items.
business, right. However, if we didn't ask for a full presentation of the Amity, the middle school schedules, there's things we wouldn't have known that were in there. And not necessarily that I was looking to vote on it, but if we didn't have a full presentation and we didn't ask for it, we would have voted on a budget that it would have allowed the full change to the schedule, that when we discussed it in the full presentation, then we realized there was things that Patrick liked. Maybe I didn't like, maybe someone else did like. So not necessarily that we had to vote on it, but if we didn't ask for the full presentation, there's things we wouldn't have known.
Okay, so you are 100% right, and if we don't make sure that we hear the full presentation and to our, to what we want to hear, then we have to ask the questions. And if we don't ask the questions and then come and blame somebody that it's not what we wanted, if we didn't ask the question, then,
And Paul,
Right.
that is
exactly.
part of our role as board
Board
members.
members ask
Like
the
when I
questions.
show up, I'm sorry, I show up to poke the holes, right? With a critical eye, not because of any personal thing between me and the superintendent, but like, we have 13 minds here, right? And so collectively, when we ask questions, that's what we get something better in the end. That's just part of the role.
Okay, that's great. Is there somebody who has a question that has not been even mentioned tonight that they want to hear a specific answer to from a legal point?
I do.
Okay,
So let's say someone makes a motion to vote on this. Can it be indefinitely suppressed through a tabling?
I mean, following Robert's rules, I suppose it can be tabled. If the majority want to table it, under Robert's rules, it can be tabled, sure.
Right, because the motion was, if I remember correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong, the board has the authority to vote. And that ended up going absolutely nowhere. But it was a very intense meeting and.
It was split.
It didn't pass though.
It didn't pass because it was a
the
split.
board should be aware if the chair makes a ruling on a particular item, somebody can raise a point of order and ask that the board vote on whether or not the chair is correct in either, saying that something is wrong or something is right. Generally, according to Robert's Rules of Order, it takes 2/3 of the vote, that's 2/3 of the voting members to approve that. And you can check that in Robert's Rules of Order.
Right, to overrule chair. So that, in that same meeting, I was just going to motion to vote, but it was rather intense. So I had a different idea of just bringing the motion because, I'm listening and I'm hearing everyone's, we have the authority and should we vote and why we shouldn't vote and why we should vote. If we just did do a vote.
Maybe one of our goals for the entire board this year is to be able to define exactly how we want the board to run. And there are some people that say the board should be doing this and the board should be doing that. And ultimately, at least at this point, from my standpoint, as an elected chair, I try and do what I can to keep the meetings running smoothly, accomplish all our business, and take into account, at least in some way or other, the wants and desires of all the members. There may be at times that I will say that's out of order or we're not accepting it, and then come around and say, let's see if we can go back and find a way to address your situation. I try and do my best, but, obviously, there's going to be people who disagree with what I do from time to time. And I think that is the way with all organizations that happens. And now you have that. No more questions, right? Anybody? Good. We have public comment. Next item of business. Anyone?
Well,
Anybody here for public comment?
Thank you for your time.
I have no public comments.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
I hope it was helpful.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Does any board member want to make a public comment to the agenda items?
We can't, we
I have,
On the agenda item.
on the agenda, because it's special.
I have a request from the board, 4 board members. And
Good night, everybody.
I think we had a fruitful meeting this evening, and I don't want to let it go at that. So what I'd like you, if you have some time and some thoughts about it, give yourself a few days to see if you can send to me your thoughts and things that you'd like to see us do as a full board to shall we say, address these concerns that we've had tonight, and maybe we could work additionally, and I wanted to start that a couple of meetings ago. The other thing I want to do, talk about as far as meetings go, Autumn sent me a suggestion about the way, trying to be a little bit more efficient in meetings, and we talked about something called the consent agenda. For those of you who don't know what that is, a lot of the stuff we do is very routine and everybody agrees to it and so on. And consent agenda is just, rather than debating the whole thing and going through all the information, we set it aside on a special agenda, and then when we have all the items that we're going to vote for on that agenda, we'll ask the board, if somebody wants to remove that because they don't agree with it any longer, something like that. And if that's all clear, then there may be 4 or 5 or 6 items on there, rather than debating the whole time or getting full explanations about everything that's in our packet to begin with. We vote the consent agenda approved. That would approve all those motions. So I'm looking at that, and it's a technique that a lot of organizations use, and it would never remove from the regular agenda an item that one person wants to discuss. So it's only items that.
Would this be like business items?
It could be business items, it could be anything. The chair would say, item number 4, I'd like to place on the consent agenda, are there any objections? And if somebody has a concern about that, they say, I have an objection, they say, okay, we don't put it on there. And that's the way we normally operate, that type of thing. So I'd like to try it at some meeting in the future, and
In a lot of cases, I mean, and again, just sort of, I'll try to find some examples, because I know there are boards who do this, but like approval of minutes is on the consent agenda. We have to sort of enable our meetings, but like a lot of times our transfers are on the agenda because you guys usually typically approve the transfers. You know, the transfers under $3,000, which is an information item. So there's a series of kind of regular things, to Paul's point, that you approve fairly regularly, and that's what boards put on consent agendas. I will say, there are a lot of boards that will put policy on consent agendas. You know, and so, that does happen.
our policy committee works too hard to be put on.
But then is the consent agenda at the same meeting?
So yeah, a lot of times it's the first item of business.
First item of business, right.
You vote to approve the consent agenda, and all those things now you're like, check, 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 we're all done. And then you have time, then you go on to the
the other
rest of the
things.
meeting.
Do you, is there like, this is the consent agenda and you call a vote to clear all that stuff, or just by saying?
That's typically how it happens is, you
But the
know,
vote doesn't necessarily have to be taken at that time, because we may come to an item later on and everybody says, oh, there's no issue with that. I said, would you like to add that to the consent agenda? That can be done too. So we'd have to figure out what's best. Kristen?
Well, in the spirit of discussing upcoming meetings, right, there is, that a request, leaving the
Right.
content out of this question, for, signed by 3 or more, asking for a special meeting to address something that I think is we all might agree is significant to each in our communities, and that perhaps we should all talk about. I really appreciate the thought and the content response in that, hey, we could probably wait till some other time to have it more informed by third parties. Again, I'm being intentionally obtuse for the record. But I'm wondering if we could kind of if we could have the original special meeting, possibly even what some might say prematurely, but just so we as a board can talk to each other about what's going on, as Patrick noted, and I think as we've all realized, look, sometimes in these kind of circumstances, just to be able to discuss amongst ourselves what's going on can be really helpful. And then we can meet again with council, recognizing that that meeting wouldn't be elucidated, benefited by having, the complete research of council. But could we have that meeting without council sooner than later? So we can talk as a board?
I really don't know if the board as a whole would want to do that. And
we could vote, but again, there wasn't really a discretion.
I don't know.
We
could go through policy first.
I understand what you're saying, and
The policy didn't seem to provide for a discretion. The policy said if 3 or more, then it will happen. It wasn't.
No,
But as a matter of respecting all of our time.
I totally
May I make
accept.
a suggestion and find out from your council how soon they would be prepared to respond? If they say 2 months or a month, that's different, but if they say we'll be ready
Before the end of
next
the week,
week.
kinda?
So if I could just maybe give them a little time and then they can give us a.
Just one thing we didn't get would be, and I didn't ask the question, about generally speaking, how would you advise if things?
Yeah,
Let me
get into that.
sort of follow up and just sort of see what timeframe they're thinking to make it.
And one of the things I did discuss with him is people that are more expert in a particular area that he doesn't necessarily cover. So
Might be able to form some questions or concerns as a group amongst ourselves, being, just lay people, and then that would actually benefit to be passed on, so that when we do have a more legally informed meeting, I anticipate that might be productive. I'm just, hey, you know what, if the board isn't really worried about it, and hey, we'll get together, then.
I'm not gonna give my personal opinion. I know my concern is only that we now have 2 meetings a month, and we're gonna have another special meeting, the one you called.
This doesn't happen.
And then it was soon add another meeting, all within a period of a few weeks, and, it's.
This could
I would love to say, sure, it's no problem, but I do have a suggestion.
Mike hasn't talked about anything all night.
To your bit, can we just ask Jen, can you reach out to council and see if we can get an answer by Friday? If we can't, can you try to schedule? If they say 2 months, if it's not like next week or something very timely, can we just schedule something as soon as we can?
But then how does that work? Not to interrupt, but how does that work? Do we re-request a meeting? Does the original request stand?
We just get to the attorneys and say, can you get, a basic idea of what we should do to give to us in a meeting?
But we don't have to re-request a meeting to you guys.
Starting out.
So would this be an executive session, or would this be?
I certainly, we could be an executive session if it discusses a legal matter.
But this is kind of I don't know whether at this point it is technically a legal matter or not, because there is some, but I am personally a bit concerned about being able to say things in a way that, without any knowledge, meaning what exactly should I say and what I should not say. And it concerns me a little bit to be in a meeting where, without any legal guidance, I shoot my mouth off and say certain things that actually
I would love to see that.
There is the issue, and it's interesting, it comes from the chair of finance, that if you have 2 meetings with lawyers, you're going to be having additional costs. And
I will confer with the attorneys prior to a meeting, whether it's with them or whether it's not with them, if it qualifies for executive session. I do that all the time.
Okay.
We'll
work on it.
Yeah, we're gonna, I just think that, the request is, look, this doesn't happen all the time. This is rare. This is not your usual, let's have an extra meeting. This is significant. There's gonna be a number of people within all of our communities and constituents that are gonna be, all worked up over this, and they're gonna be putting pressure on each one of us, and I think we, as a board and individually, really need to know how we handle the public inquiries and public pressures, and I'd like to believe that even you can provide us, as a chair, guidance in the absence of a lawyer breaking down the legal elements of what's going on, but generally talk to us about the situation. I think that would help us all, because right now, we're kind of unable to do so without creating a meeting, and we're all kind of foundering in our own little individual, what the heck's going on here, and how do we handle it? And I think the sooner we coalesce as a board, the better for everybody.
And Paul, with the end of the year coming up, if I can make a request that we attempt to have it be connected to a meeting we already have, so that we're not unable to attend because it's at a random day or time.
On the day that we have it.
Yeah, so maybe it's executive session before or after a normal or a special meeting that's already scheduled.
I mean,
We don't have other meetings
That's
scheduled.
2 weeks, that's it.
You're somewhat constrained also by the availability of the attorneys, and in this case,
Right,
very
okay.
particular attorneys that are
We
recommended.
need to check with
in
you,
advance.
right?
So I will expedite it as fast as I can with the correct people, but I don't know that we'll have a whole lot of choice.
Please, right, yes, and I'll talk to you about that and try and get that date set. It's a difficult issue and it's of concern to everyone.
It is a difficult issue, but it went out to the public.
Yeah, and that's another item that we had a little screw up that went to the kids too, I think, as I stated in my.
Because we created some noise, right? We need to really have some kind of position.
So we, as a policy, were able to go into executive and discuss it in that fashion, and I found that to be very informative and very beneficial, and I think the rest of this board would benefit from it. And we didn't have legal counsel there, and it was very helpful, and that's what I'm recommending.
Well, thank you.
Mike is requesting that Mike is.
So just a couple of reminders for the board for next week. Next Monday is your annual meeting. 5:30, it takes about 15 minutes, but it opens up the referendum, but we do have to have people there to actually run it. Or else, like, there has to be somebody to open the referendum. It'll be a very brief meeting. If we do not have anybody in the public, I do not have to give another presentation of the budget. So you can waive that. At 5:45, the facilities committee meeting will meet as soon as that annual meeting is done. And then, is it in the presentation
Yeah,
room?
because remember, Peter Downhour is in here with,
Oh, it's in the presentation room, so we'll have to move, because I guess student government is in here.
Yeah.
Which is fine, most of our facilities meetings have been in the presentation room, so that will work.
oh, social district meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yes, annual meeting, yes. Oh, the annual meeting's in the presentation room
Yeah,
also?
yeah.
Oh, okay, everything's in the presentation room, we'll post it as such.
I did.
Great, thank you. So yeah, those are both next Monday.
All right.
I'll make a motion to adjourn for Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any objections to adjourning? No objections. Meeting is adjourned without objection.
So I literally had.